So let's get right to it. Is recreational marijuana actually bad for your brain? I mean, for decades, it was just seen as this drug with zero medical value. But now, its therapeutic benefits are pretty widely acknowledged. And that leaves this huge question for so many of us. So, in this explainer, we're going to dig into the science and see if we can find some clear answers. All right, so to really get to the bottom of this, here's our game plan. We'll start with how the whole conversation around cannabis has shifted. Then we're going to dive into this amazing system your brain already has. We'll break down the difference between THC and CBD, talk about why age is maybe the most important piece of the puzzle, and then get into some of the real-world risks and how to stay safe. Let's jump in. Okay, first up, the question of cannabis. It's gone from being seen as just an illegal substance to, in many cases, mainstream medicine. So why are we even talking about this so much right now? Well, it's because the world's perspective has done a complete 180. For the longest time, right, marijuana was a Schedule I drug in the US. That's the same category as some really serious stuff, basically saying it has zero accepted medical use. But that view is, well, it's changing fast. Today, we're acknowledging all these therapeutic benefits. It's being legalized for medical use all over the place. And that means scientists can finally start asking the big questions and actually study its real effects on the brain. All right, section 2. This is where it gets super interesting. We're going to talk about your brain's own system. Think of it as a master regulator. Because before we can even talk about how marijuana affects us, you have to understand this incredible system that's already hardwired in all of us. It's called the endocannabinoid system. So what the heck is that? Well, picture this giant network of receptors all over your brain and body, and they're designed to respond to molecules that your own body makes. These are called endocannabinoids. It's kind of like your brain's internal volume dial. It's constantly fine-tuning things, turning signals up or down for your mood, your memory, even stuff like how you experience taste and smell. It's a huge deal. And here's the really wild part. What makes this system so unique? You see, most brain signals are a one-way street, right? Neuron A talks to neuron B, end of story. But not here. With this system, after neuron A sends its message, the receiving neuron, it talks back. It literally sends a message backwards that basically tells the first neuron, hey, got the message, you can quiet down now. It's this feedback loop, like a brake system that's constantly fine-tuning communication all over your brain. Okay, so now that we know about this internal system, let's talk about the plant's key players, THC versus CBD. This is where marijuana enters the picture. It has these compounds that, guess what, basically mimic our body's own molecules. But the two you always hear about, THC and CBD, they interact with this system in totally different ways. And here's the main thing you need to remember. THC, that's tetrahydrocannabinol. That's the one that causes the psychoactive effects, the high that changes how you think and perceive things. CBD, on the other hand, cannabidiol, that's responsible for all the non-psychoactive effects, and it's what a lot of the medical research is really focused on. This is the really, really key difference. Think of it this way. Your body is like a careful surgeon. It releases its own endocannabinoids with incredible precision right where they're needed and only when they're needed. THC, well, it's more like a sledgehammer. It doesn't just tap the brakes in one little spot. It floods your entire system all at once. And that right there, that's why the effects can be so wildly different from person to person. It all comes down to how your specific brain chemistry and genetics react to that system-wide flood. Now we get to what is maybe the single most important part of this whole conversation, the developing brain, and why age matters so much. Because the science is crystal clear on this. The effects on a brain that's still under construction are just profoundly different from the effects on one that's fully mature. Yeah, a lot of us think our brains are pretty much done by the time we're, 18? But that's just not true. The reality is your brain is a massive construction site all the way up until you're about 25. All through your teens and early 20s, these super important areas, the ones for decision-making, impulse control, communication, they're all getting a major overhaul. And that makes it a really, really vulnerable time. So what happens when you introduce something like THC during this critical construction phase? Well, the research suggests it can really interfere with those vital processes. It can mess with how those communication highways, the white matter, are being built. It can affect the brain's ability to forge new connections, and all of this could potentially impair things like long-term learning. But the biggest and frankly scariest question mark is that scientists still aren't sure if this kind of damage is even reversible. And look, the risk isn't even the same for everyone under 25. It's a sliding scale. The younger you start, the higher the potential for harm seems to be.
I mean, a 15-year-old's brain is changing so much more rapidly and is way more vulnerable than the brain of a 22-year-old. The science really reflects that difference in risk.
Next, we need to talk about one of the most serious, though rare, potential risks: psychosis. Now, this is a sensitive topic, but it's an absolutely essential part of having an honest conversation about all this.
So, the big question: can cannabis trigger psychosis? The answer: it's complicated. For some people, sure, it might trigger some temporary paranoia or odd thoughts that just fade as the drug wears off. But for a small number of vulnerable individuals, the link can be much, much more serious.
So who are these vulnerable individuals? Well, the number one clearest risk factor is having a personal or family history of psychotic disorders, like schizophrenia. For those people, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. Does the marijuana cause the disorder? Does it just trigger it to show up earlier? Or is the person's reaction just a sign of an issue that was already there? The science is still trying to untangle that, but the connection is definitely there.
Okay, so knowing all these risks is one thing, but what can you actually do with this information? Let's move into our last section: practical harm reduction. We'll talk about tolerance, withdrawal, and just generally how to make safer choices. So first, a few key facts. Just like with a lot of things, your body builds up a tolerance with repeated use. Now, the good news here is pretty significant. There is no risk of a fatal overdose from marijuana by itself. That's a really important point. But while withdrawal isn't life-threatening like it can be for other substances, it is a real thing. People can definitely experience trouble sleeping, feel really irritable, or have a depressed mood. It usually passes, but it's not nothing. So if we boil all this science down, what are the clear strategies for reducing harm? Well, it comes down to a few key things. Number one, and this is the big one, delay use until your brain is fully developed, around age 25. 2, know your family's mental health history, especially when it comes to psychosis. And 3, always remember that because of how THC floods the system, its effects are super individual. Your experience won't be the same as your friends. And that brings us all the way back to where we started. So, is marijuana bad for your brain? You know, the most honest, scientifically accurate answer we have right now is it depends who you are. There's just no single one-size-fits-all verdict here. Let's break that down. For a fully mature adult who uses cannabis occasionally, the known risks appear to be pretty low. But for an adolescent, especially one who uses it frequently and heavily, the scientific evidence pointing to potential harm to their developing brain is, well, it's strong. So the conversation isn't really about whether marijuana is good or bad. It's about understanding how it works, who is most at risk, and why age matters so much. As the science keeps evolving, the real question for all of us is this: how can we use this knowledge to have more honest conversations and make smarter, safer choices?